Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan, listeners. Today we're going on a deep dive into a really fascinating work, and I'm so excited to be joined again by our expert to unpack this for us.
I'm excited to be back.
We are taking a deep dive into the Book of Knowledge. This is the first quarter of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulum, which translates to the revival of the religious sciences.
It's like a masterclass on knowledge from an Islamic perspective.
It is, and it really is, and we are going to try to do it justice.
Mashallah.
So, right from the get-go, al-Ghazali doesn't hold back when it comes to the value of knowledge. He makes this powerful case for the supreme value of knowledge in Islam.
Yeah, I mean, what's so captivating about al-Ghazali is how he presents knowledge, right? It's not just some theoretical concept. He shows how it shapes our lives, our everyday lives. And he really does lay out a roadmap, and he uses the Quran and Hadith to do this for understanding not only the value, but also the purpose and different types of knowledge.
It's almost like a guide to not just knowing things, but truly living a meaningful life. And, that first chapter opens up with that, where it's almost like a rhetorical question from the Quran, right? Are those who know equal to those who do not know?
Right.
It's not meant to be answered. It's meant to make you think.
Yeah, and he doesn't stop there, right? He brings in, he actually draws upon this verse where Allah himself, along with the angels and those possessing knowledge, bear witness to his oneness.
Well, that's powerful.
Right, so, it's like elevates knowledge to a divine level, emphasizing that knowledge is actually key to establishing righteousness and drawing us closer to God.
And to make it like crystal clear, he also brings in the hadith. And there's this beautiful hadith that states that seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim.
Every Muslim.
Not a suggestion.
Yeah, not a suggestion, a must.
But this is where it starts to get even more interesting. And this is what I really appreciated about the way that he break down knowledge, is because he's not talking about just any kind of knowledge.
Exactly. That's such a good point, because he introduces this hierarchy of knowledge. At the very top, which, might resonate even with us today, the most important and valuable is knowledge of God. And what that means, if we break that down even further, is understanding God's nature, his attributes, his relationship with creation. That, my friend, shapes everything.
Right.
Everything.
And then he talks about knowledge that is related to the hereafter, so our life after death. And it's almost like he's saying, hey, guys, listen, this dunya, right, this worldly stuff, this is all temporary, but what about eternity?
Right.
Like, what happens after we leave this earth? What do we do to prepare ourselves? And that, to me, is so powerful.
Yeah. It's that bigger picture perspective, isn't it? And, it makes me think of his very powerful analogy of a man about to die who is totally oblivious, caught up in worldly matters, and he's just completely forgotten about the spiritual preparation. It's like a wake-up call for all of us, It's like, where is your focus? Where should it be?
That analogy hits you right in the gut.
It does. It does.
And al-Ghazali is really good at that, like those analogies that really hit home. I love how he emphasizes not just learning, though, but also teaching.
Yes.
And he uses this beautiful imagery, which is one of my favorites, which is the angels lowering their wings for the seeker of knowledge. It's almost as if, like, they're giving their stamp of approval, right?
Yeah.
They're giving their protection to those who are seeking beneficial knowledge.
And sharing it.
And sharing it.
Share it. So that elevates both the student and the teacher in our tradition.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it just shows the value and the weight that both the student and the teacher have within Islamic tradition.
Yeah.
And you know what reinforces that? I think the story of Imam al-Shafi'i, who was this brilliant scholar, and he was offered a very prestigious judgeship.
Power, wealth, you name it.
He had it all, but he chose knowledge instead. He said, you know what? I want to dedicate my life to seeking and sharing knowledge for the sake of God, not for dunya, not for worldly gain.
Yeah. It's beautiful because that story is not just a historical anecdote. It's very symbolic. It highlights a key theme that's running through the entire Ihya, which is the pursuit of Ihsan, or spiritual excellence. So it's like al-Shafi'i's choice demonstrates that true knowledge transcends worldly ambitions. It's about connecting with something much bigger, much more meaningful.
I love that. And it brings us to a really practical distinction that al-Ghazali makes in the Book of Knowledge between fard ain and fard kifaya.
Yes.
So in simpler terms, it's individual versus communal obligations when it comes to knowledge.
Right. So fard ain refers to knowledge that is essential for every single Muslim. Think of it as the foundation, right? So it's knowing the core tenets of faith, how to pray, those purification rituals, fasting guidelines, basically what you need to live a life that is aligned with Islam.
So I guess if we were to bring it to today's world, learning how to pray the 5 daily prayers would be considered fardane.
Yes,
But
exactly.
what about something like Islamic finance?
Right, so that would fall under fard kifaya, which
Okay.
is a communal obligation. Not everyone needs to be a scholar in Islamic finance, but there need to be enough people within the community who specialize in it so that the entire community's needs are being met.
So, but even with those specialized fields like Islamic finance, al-Ghazali isn't saying that we should just completely ignore them.
No, 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 not at all. He emphasizes that even with fard kifaya, even with those communal obligations, it's still important to have a basic understanding of those fields.
And why is that?
Because it safeguards you from being misled, especially in matters of faith or things that directly impact your life, right? It's like you need to know enough to make those informed decisions and to protect yourself from, those who might try to mislead you, especially in those areas.
Okay, so that makes sense. And I think this is where it gets really interesting because he categorizes knowledge into praiseworthy. And we touched on that earlier, Mahmud and then blameworthy Madhun branches. It's almost like he's giving us this filter to use, right, to go through all this knowledge that's out there.
Yeah, all that information, right, to figure out what is truly beneficial for us.
What's truly beneficial for our spiritual growth.
Yeah, what aligns with our purpose, right?
Exactly. So this kind of then leads us to, well, how do we know, like, what are the sources of knowledge? And he breaks it down into 4, right?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So he talks about source-based knowledge, reason-based knowledge, revelation-based knowledge, and unveiling-based knowledge.
Yeah.
And these sources end up shaping different disciplines.
So when we're talking about source-based knowledge, we're looking at those disciplines that really heavily rely on established authorities. So things like the Quran and Sunnah, right? Which is the way of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And this is kind of like, the foundation, if you will, for Islamic law, theology, practice. So it includes things like Islamic jurisprudence, which is the study of Islamic law, Quranic exegesis, studying hadith. All of that would fall under source-based.
Exactly. And then, you have reason-based knowledge. This is what we gain through our intellect, logic, observation. So things like math, astronomy, and even philosophy would fit in here. And al-Ghazali, he emphasizes the importance of these sciences. He really stresses things like arithmetic, medicine, and jurisprudence when it comes to fulfilling our religious duties. It's like they're tools to help us navigate the complexity of life and fulfill our obligations to God.
It's really fascinating how he takes these sciences that kind of at first glance seem secular, but he's showing how they can be used for a higher purpose to really get closer to God. But he is a little cautious about some fields, especially logic and philosophy.
He is. And it's not that he's rejecting them outright, but he's urging us to proceed with caution, especially if they have elements that might contradict Islamic law. So al-Ghazali is reminding us that not all knowledge is equal.
Right.
And some fields, might need that extra consideration, that balanced perspective.
It's like that reminder. Use your intellect. Explore these different fields of knowledge and always ground yourself in the divine principles of Islam. And ultimately, that's our goal, to seek knowledge that aligns with worshiping God and pleasing Him. And I think this brings us to that topic, a very contentious one even today that he talks about, the dangers of excessive disputation and debate.
Yeah.
Now, he's not, I think, completely against intellectual discussion, is he?
Right.
It's not about that. It's about approaching it for the right reasons.
Exactly. And I think it's more so about the intention, right? Because he's calling out those who are arguing just to win, to show off their knowledge, without a genuine desire to seek the truth. And this is what happens, right? Our egos get in the way of genuine learning. And he actually outlines 10 negative traits that he sees in people who just excessively debate. It's fascinating. He talks about arrogance, that feeling of like superiority you feel over your opponent when you're debating them.
Right.
It leads you to not even listening, dismissing their arguments. And then there's envy. It's that poisonous feeling, right? When you see someone with knowledge or skills that you might lack.
You feel threatened.
You're resentful. It hinders your ability to learn from that person. And then there's, how about the love for praise? People who are so driven by wanting validation from others. They're no longer seeking the truth. They're just seeking applause.
And they'll do whatever it takes to get that applause.
Exactly. So their understanding is very superficial.
Right. And this is where, and it doesn't stop there, he talks about anger, resentment, how easily debates, trigger emotional outbursts.
Oh, yeah.
It just clouds your judgment.
All of a sudden, you're no longer having a rational discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is, he's literally giving us a roadmap to say, listen, guys, if we engage in debate for the wrong reasons, this is where it can take you.
Right. But the key here is he's not saying all debate is bad.
Right.
It's about the intention. Are you approaching it with humility, respecting your opponent? If you're genuinely seeking the truth, then it can be beneficial.
But if it's driven by your ego, oh, it can be very spiritually damaging.
Very damaging, yeah.
It's such a good reminder, especially I think about today's world and how many online debates we have, social media arguments, and it's so easy to get caught up in that. So I think that question of intention is something we should all be asking ourselves before we engage in that. Like, what's my intention here? Am I genuinely seeking understanding, or am I just trying to win?
Yeah, yeah. Excellent point. It's very easy to get lost in that heat of the moment, and we completely forget about what our real intention was in the first place.
And I think that kind of beautifully brings us to this other crucial element that al-Ghazali talks about,
Mm.
and that is the role of the teacher.
Mm.
And he dedicates a good chunk of the book to this, really outlining the qualities of a true teacher and the responsibilities that they carry.
Yeah, and he does a beautiful job here because he's basically saying, listen, knowledge is powerful, and the person guiding you on that journey has a huge impact on you. And so he actually outlines 10 characteristics of a true teacher, and these are not just about their intellect. It's about their character, their spiritual depth. It's much more holistic than just their knowledge.
It's about who they are as a person.
Exactly.
And I love that because we hear so much emphasis sometimes on just the knowledge part, but the character part is really what shines through, I think, from a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first one that he mentions, of course, is ilm, which is knowledge itself.
Right.
They need to have that deep understanding of their subject matter, be well-versed in those Islamic texts, be able to convey that knowledge clearly. That's just the baseline.
That's just the starting point. But then he goes on to talk about amal, which means action, right? So a true teacher doesn't just talk the talk.
They walk the walk.
They walks the walk.
They live it.
They embody those principles that they are teaching, so they become living examples of knowledge in action.
I love that. And I think that's really what gives that teacher credibility, right? Is when they are able to show that what they're teaching is not just theoretical knowledge, but something that they themselves are trying to live by.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Then he talks about wara, which is piety. So a teacher's devotion to God, their adherence to Islamic principles, should be evident in their conduct.
You should be able to see it.
You should be able to see it.
Yeah. And I love how you described it, like, it's like a fragrance emanating from them.
That's beautiful.
It inspires, right, and it motivates those students to strive for that level of, spiritual purity.
It's that role model, right?
Yeah.
It's showing them what a life guided by knowledge looks like. And this one is interesting, too. Zud.
Yes.
Asceticism.
Yeah, and this one is often misunderstood, right? It doesn't mean that they have to live in poverty. It means, that detachment from the dunya, that detachment from worldly possessions. They have a focus on the hereafter. They're not consumed by just the material pursuits of this life.
Right.
They have that bigger picture perspective.
And I think that kind of beautifully leads to that. Like truthfulness, siddiq, right?
Yes.
That a true teacher needs to be honest in the words and their actions. They need to avoid deception. They need to build that trust with their students.
Yeah. Transparency, reliability. It's like their knowledge should not be tainted by some hidden agenda.
Exactly. Then there's that quality of hilm.
Forbearance.
Forbearance, yeah.
Which, encompasses, patience, gentleness, willingness to overlook those minor mistakes that the students make.
Right, because they're on that journey.
They're on a journey.
And you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Of course. So it's about creating that supportive environment so that learning can actually flourish.
Exactly. And then there's Saka.
Generosity.
Generosity, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A true teacher, shares their knowledge freely without holding back. They're patient. They'll answer questions. They want their students to excel. It's that fostering that love of learning within them.
Exactly. And then Rama.
Compassion.
Compassion.
So important. Right.
So important.
Yeah.
Because a true teacher understands the challenges that their students face, and they offer guidance with that kindness.
Yeah, empathy, that kindness. And that's because they recognize, they remember what it was like to be a student.
And to struggle.
To struggle, to go through those difficulties.
And last but not least, Ihsan.
Spiritual excellence.
The heart of it all.
Yes.
Because the teacher who embodies Ihsan, they approach their role with such a deep sense of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
They recognize they're not just shaping minds, they're they're shaping souls.
Right. So it's a high bar for sure, but it just goes to show what a profound impact teachers have on their students' lives.
It's a huge responsibility, I think, something we should all be mindful of.
Yeah, and it really kind of reinforces that notion that teaching is not just a profession, it's a sacred trust.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how al-Ghazali builds on each concept. We talked about the importance of knowledge, the types, the sources, and now we're getting into discerning what's truly beneficial, those praiseworthy branches of knowledge.
It's like he's given us this compass
Yes.
to navigate through this sea of information
Mm-hmm.
and really find the treasures that are going to help us nourish our souls.
Right.
And I think one of the things that was really interesting to me is how he connects these sciences like arithmetic, medicine, to actually fulfilling our religious duties.
Yeah, and we have to remember he was writing in the 11th century,
Right.
a time when Islamic civilization was flourishing in science, philosophy, arts.
Golden age, right?
Golden age,
Yeah.
exactly. And so he saw this interconnectedness of knowledge. He understood that these seemingly secular sciences, they could actually be utilized for a higher purpose, like drawing closer to God, strengthening your faith.
So it's not about putting knowledge into these boxes like this is religious or this is worldly.
Right.
It's recognizing that all these disciplines can actually enhance our understanding of Islam
Absolutely.
and our relationship with God.
It's like seeing the interconnectedness of everything, right? How every branch of knowledge can ultimately lead us back to the source.
I love that. And I love the examples that he gives, with arithmetic.
Yeah.
He talks about how it's essential for those calculations that are related to inheritance laws,
Mm-hmm.
which is a huge part of, Islamic jurisprudence.
Right. Right. And it ensures that, after someone passes away, the wealth is distributed fairly equitably and, according to Islamic guidelines.
Right. So you're taking this, again, seemingly mundane subject like arithmetic,
Mm-hmm.
but he's showing you how it's directly tied to your relationship with God and how it's not just about crunching numbers. It's about upholding justice.
Fulfilling God's commands. Yeah.
And then you have something like medicine.
Right, which directly impacts our well-being.
Right.
And al-Ghazali emphasizes that maintaining good health is so essential for fulfilling our religious obligations. If you're constantly sick, battling illness, it's going to be much harder for you to pray, to fast, to engage in other acts of worship with presence and devotion. So, medicine, in his view, is a means of enabling us to live a life that's conducive to spiritual growth.
It's like that saying, take care of your body so you can take care of your soul.
Exactly. It's holistic. It's this interconnectedness of our physical, mental, and spiritual states.
And then you have jurisprudence.
Right, the study of Islamic law. And this is where, understanding those finer points of Islamic teachings becomes really important because it's about knowing what's permissible, what's prohibited, how to conduct yourself in different situations, how to navigate, the complexity of life within an Islamic framework.
It's like a guidebook.
Yeah, it is like a guidebook. It's like having those tools and that knowledge to be able to live a life that's aligned with God's will, to contribute to a just and equitable society.
But he doesn't just stop at those praiseworthy. He also gets into the blameworthy, the madman. And it's not that he's saying, reject these fields completely.
Right.
But he's kind of saying, proceed with caution.
Proceed with caution, discernment.
Yeah.
He mentions things like, magic, talismanic sciences, things that involve deception and manipulation, right? Trickery. And he argues that they can actually lead people away from righteousness, that they promote superstition, reliance on forces other than God. They can even cause harm to others. And so, he's concerned about the potential for misuse of these sciences.
Right. It's not knowledge itself. It's about the intention behind it, the way that it's being used, and
Yeah.
whether it's being used for something that is harmful or beneficial.
Exactly. And it kind of goes back to that, be a critical thinker, evaluate what are the purposes, what are the consequences of the knowledge that you are engaging with.
Be responsible with that knowledge.
Be responsible, yeah. Use it for a greater purpose.
Yeah. And this, I think, reminds me of when he's talking about disputation and debate.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that same concept. Knowledge can be this double-edged sword.
It can.
If you're using it to fuel your ego, to argue, to bring people down, it can be so spiritually damaging.
It is. And, it's interesting how he connects those negative traits that we discussed, arrogance, envy, love of praise. He connects that to why people engage in debates for the wrong reasons. It's like it becomes this breeding ground for negativity, and it pulls you further away from God rather than closer to him.
And I think you mentioned anger, resentment.
Oh, yes.
How quickly those emotions come up.
They derail the whole conversation.
Yeah.
You know, it's like those heated online debates that we see
All the time.
all the time. It's just, going back and forth, and there's no real interest in even trying to understand the other perspective.
Right. And that's a beautiful, I think, example of how al-Ghazali's insights are still so relevant for us today, right?
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
a timeless reminder to say, use your knowledge to build bridges, not walls.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Use it to foster understanding and compassion.
But let's kind of switch gears a little bit
Okay.
because I want to get into the characteristics of a true teacher. And I love this section of the book.
Oh, me too. It's like a masterclass for both those seeking knowledge and those who want to teach.
Yes.
Because he emphasizes how much responsibility a teacher carries. And, it's not just about, imparting information. You are shaping hearts and minds, you know.
It's at shaping souls, influencing character, and really putting them on that path of spiritual excellence.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's like being given this precious gem. And, you're the one who's entrusted with, like, okay, how do I take this? How do I polish it? And how do I present it in a way that really shows its beauty?
Beautiful, yeah. And he starts, of course, with knowledge itself.
Right.
Because the teacher needs to have a deep, comprehensive understanding of what they're teaching. They should be, well-versed in the texts, grasp those concepts, and be able to convey them clearly to the students.
But knowledge, like we were talking about, that's just like step one, right?
It's the starting point.
It's like having a treasure chest full of gold, but if you don't know how to open it
Or share it.
or share it,
Yeah,
then what's the point?
exactly.
So that's where the amal comes in, the action.
Right, that action piece.
They live it.
They embody it. So they become living examples of that knowledge in action.
That's beautiful. I love that. So
Yeah.
it's not just like, okay, I'm teaching it to you, but I'm not doing it. It's, I'm trying, I'm struggling, I'm on this journey with you.
I'm with you. We're on this journey together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's that piety piece, the wara that we talked about,
Yeah.
where their devotion to God, their adherence to those Islamic principles, it should be evident.
Mm-hmm. You should be able to see it in the way that they interact with others in their everyday lives.
It's that subtle yet like powerful influence.
Yeah, it's that fragrance that we talked about.
Exactly, yeah. And this one too, I think is also sometimes misunderstood, Zud,
Yeah,
asceticism.
right.
And it's not about, completely rejecting the dunya or like living in poverty.
It's about that balance. It's
Yeah.
recognizing that, when you have too much attachment to the dunya, it distracts you.
That holds you back.
Yeah, it can hinder your spiritual growth.
Yeah.
So the teacher, embodies that. They show their students that true fulfillment isn't about, just having the material things, but that spiritual growth.
And then that honesty, the sidq.
Yes.
They have to be honest, trustworthy in their words, in their actions.
Uh-huh.
Avoid that deception. Build that trust with the students.
It's like that transparency piece, right? They're reliable. The knowledge that they're sharing shouldn't be coming from, some hidden motive that they have.
Right. And then the hilm, which is forbearance.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like, encompasses that patience, the gentleness,
Willingness to forgive.
forgive. Yeah. Overlooking those mistakes because they're on that journey.
Exactly. And, we all make mistakes, and it's about creating that supportive environment.
Exactly. And Saka generosity, right? Where they're freely sharing knowledge. They're not holding back. They're patient. They're answering questions. They really want their students to excel.
And that fosters that love of learning.
It's like a fountain.
It is. It's a beautiful image.
So that's just continuously giving that knowledge. And anyone who's thirsty, come and drink.
Come and quench your thirst.
Yeah.
I love that.
And then Rama, the compassion piece.
Yeah, so important because the teacher understands, they remember,
They've been there.
they've been there, and they know that there are challenges that the students are facing. And so they offer that guidance with empathy, kindness, understanding that, it's not easy.
Right. And then that last one, Ihsan, spiritual excellence, that heart of it all,
Yeah.
where the teacher really recognizes, like, I'm not just shaping minds here, I'm shaping souls.
It's a trust.
It's huge.
It's a huge responsibility, and it really kind of, reinforces that this is a sacred trust. This is not just a profession.
Exactly. And I think what's so beautiful is that al-Ghazali goes on to also talk about the characteristics of the student,
Yes, he does.
which we'll get to in our next segment.
We will.
Yeah.
Welcome back. As we delve further into the Book of Knowledge, it's really fascinating to see how al-Ghazali now shifts his focus from the teacher to the student.
Yeah, he really highlights those qualities that contribute to successful knowledge acquisition.
He does, and it's like he's saying, listen, having a great teacher is important, but you, the student, your efforts, your character, that plays a huge role in how much you benefit.
It's a two-way street.
It is. It is. And he outlines 10 essential characteristics. And just like with the teacher, it all starts with the niyyah.
The intention.
The intention. Why are you seeking knowledge? Are you doing it to please Allah, to draw closer to Him, to benefit yourself and others? Or is it your ego, a desire for recognition, worldly gain? That intention, it sets the foundation.
It sets the entire stage for the learning journey.
It does, like you said, like setting your compass before you embark on that voyage. If your intention is clear, aligned with your purpose, you're more likely to stay on course.
And to reach your destination.
Exactly. And alongside that intention, you have to have that sincerity, the ikhlas. It's purifying your heart from any ulterior motives and seeking knowledge for the sake of truth. When you're sincere, you know, that knowledge, it penetrates deeper, it shapes your character, it influences your actions.
It's like planting a seed in fertile soil. If the soil is pure and ready, the seed will grow strong.
Absolutely.
But if it's contaminated, that seed is not going to grow as well. It might even die.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. And then, you know, we can't forget about tawakkul, that reliance on God. It's that beautiful concept of acknowledging that our efforts alone are not enough. We need to seek His guidance. We need to ask for His help and trust that He is the one who facilitates our learning and grants us success.
It's recognizing that we're not in control of everything.
Yes, we're not. We can make the plans, we can put in the effort, but ultimately, you know, the outcome, it's in God's hands. And that's where tawakkul fosters humility. It reminds us to surrender.
To surrender to that greater power, to that higher power. And of course, sabr, patience.
Oh, so important.
Learning is a journey. And like any journey, it's going to have its ups and downs. There's going to be challenges, moments of frustration. Obstacles. And, you know, patience is what allows you to persevere through those, to really remain steadfast in your pursuit of knowledge. And I think recognizing that the struggle, that's part of the process.
It's a part of the process.
And then we kind of touched on this earlier with the teacher, but that zuhd, that asceticism, that's important for the student as well.
Absolutely. And again, you know, it's not about completely renouncing everything.
Right, living like a hermit.
It's about finding that balance, recognizing that, you know, too much attachment to those worldly comforts, it hinders your spiritual growth, it distracts you.
Yeah. From that real purpose of seeking that beneficial knowledge. And I think this kind of leads into that, you know, we talked about seeking knowledge, but al-Ghazali also warns against those who maybe present themselves as teachers, but they don't necessarily have the right intentions.
Yeah, those who might be prioritizing worldly gain over spiritual guidance.
So as a student, it's really important to be discerning.
Very, very important.
You have to look beyond the titles.
Yeah.
Look beyond the outward appearance.
Absolutely.
And really see, you know, what's in their heart.
What's that driving force, you know? Are they genuinely trying to guide you on that path of righteousness, or do they have other intentions?
And I think, too, even when you have a good teacher, right? Al-Ghazali emphasizes that critical thinking piece.
So important. You should not just blindly follow.
Don't just take everything as, okay, that's it. I'm not going to question.
Question, evaluate, seek clarification. True knowledge is not about just passive acceptance. It's about engaging with the material, you know, trying to understand it, going deeper.
It's like that active process. It's not just about memorizing information. It's wrestling with those ideas, really, like trying to make sense of them and coming to a deeper understanding.
And then, of course, respecting your teacher, acknowledging their efforts, showing gratitude for that guidance.
Right, because they're putting in a lot of effort.
They are.
But, you know, that respect shouldn't prevent you from respectfully disagreeing.
Of course.
Or seeking clarification when needed.
And a good teacher welcomes those questions.
You should.
They should. You know, it's about creating that environment where students feel comfortable.
Safe to ask questions.
Safe. And, you know, explore different perspectives.
And last but certainly not least, and this is a point that al-Ghazali, I think, really hammers home throughout the Book of Knowledge, is putting that knowledge into action.
Yes.
Because knowledge without action,
incomplete.
It's incomplete.
Potentially even harmful.
It's like having a map.
Right.
But you never leave your house.
Yeah. It's like having that recipe.
But you never bake that cake.
You never actually try it out. Yeah, it's about taking that knowledge, translating it, applying it to your life so that it's reflected in your actions. It's reflected in, hopefully, you know, positive change, and a life that reflects the beauty and wisdom that you've gained from that knowledge.
And I think this is what's so beautiful about Islamic teachings, is that emphasis on action. That it's not enough to just know what's right. You have to live it,
Embody it.
embody it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes the teachings come alive.
It does. And speaking of embodying knowledge, this brings us to a very interesting section where al-Ghazali draws a distinction between true knowledge and its counterfeits. And he outlines 8 characteristics that help us recognize true knowledge. So it's like this filter for us to figure out, okay, what is true knowledge as opposed to just information or intellectual posturing?
And I think this is so important because today's world, I mean, information is everywhere.
Everywhere. We are bombarded with it.
So how do you know?
Right.
How do we go through this noise?
Yeah.
How do we filter through all of that and figure out what's truly beneficial, what's going to lead us closer to God?
Exactly. So tell it, what are some of those characteristics that al-Ghazali gives us? What's that framework that he lays out?
So, he starts by highlighting that true knowledge actually leads you to a deeper understanding of God, his attributes, and his relationship with creation. So it fosters this awe and reverence for the divine and, inspires you to want to draw closer to him. It's like the difference between reading about the ocean and actually experiencing it.
Yes. True knowledge of God evokes wonder. It evokes humility, a deep longing to connect with the source of all creation.
So beautiful.
He then goes on to say that true knowledge should lead to an understanding of the reality of death and the hereafter. So it should remind us that this life is temporary.
It is.
And, our actions in this world have consequences in the next. So, it's like realizing that we're not just living for today, but we're also preparing for an eternal tomorrow.
It's a bigger perspective, right?
A much bigger perspective. And this awareness, of our ultimate destination that should shape our priorities, guide our choices, motivate us to live a life that is pleasing to God. And then, he highlights that true knowledge should illuminate the path to paradise, and it should warn against the path to hell. So, it should guide you towards actions that will earn you Allah's pleasure and steer you away from those behaviors that incur his wrath.
It's like that roadmap.
It is like a roadmap showing you, the paths to happiness, the paths to fulfillment, and warning you about those dangers, those pitfalls that could lead you astray. So, true knowledge is not just about the intellect, that intellectual understanding. It's about making those choices, those decisions that align with our ultimate purpose, which is to worship God.
And to have a good outcome, right, in the hereafter.
Exactly. And recognize that our actions have consequences. We are accountable.
And then he also says that true knowledge exposes the falsehood of this world and reveals the truth of the hereafter.
Yes.
It's like seeing beyond the illusion.
The distractions of this world, right? And recognizing, the reality that we are here to worship God and return to him.
That's almost like waking up from a dream, right? Where you think something is so real.
Yes.
But then you realize, wait, this was temporary. It wasn't real at all.
And true knowledge helps us to detach from those illusions and focus on the things that really matter, the things that are going to benefit us in that eternal life. And then he talks about, true knowledge diminishes that love that we have for this world, and it increases our love for the hereafter. So again, not about rejecting the world completely, but recognizing its temporary nature and shifting our focus.
Shifting your focus to what really matters,
That's
right? To the eternal.
Exactly. And then, he mentions that true knowledge unveils the defects of your soul. It's about self-awareness. It helps you recognize your shortcomings.
Was areas that you need to work on.
Exactly. Those areas where you need to, polish yourself. So it's like looking into a mirror and seeing not just your outward appearance, but those blemishes of your inner self.
Yeah.
And it inspires you to purify your heart, refine your character.
And then true knowledge results in that humility.
Yes.
Submitting to God.
Yeah, it fosters that awareness of our limitations. It instills gratitude.
It's realizing how small we are in this grand scheme of things.
It's vast creation.
Yeah.
Completely dependent upon God. And so, that leads to humility, gratitude, and a desire to submit to his will. So, these 8 characteristics, I think, are such a powerful framework
They are.
for evaluating the information we come across, the teachings we receive, and the choices we make.
It's like those guidelines.
They are guidelines,
Yeah.
yes. And they remind us that true knowledge, again, it's not just intellectual, it's about transformation.
It's changing you as a person.
Exactly. Purification.
Yeah.
Alignment.
It's letting that knowledge shape your heart,
Yeah, guide your
lead
actions.
you to a life of purpose and meaning.
And, to bring all this together, he goes beyond just defining true knowledge, but he also talks about those who exemplify that knowledge. He calls them the learned men, not just people who possess knowledge, but those who truly live by it.
It's like that difference between, having the ingredients to bake a cake and then actually baking the cake, right?
Yeah.
You could have all that knowledge, but if you're not applying it, it's not nourishing you.
It's not benefiting anyone. And he says that true learned men, they're not just walking encyclopedias. They're living examples of knowledge in action. Their character, their conduct, their interactions, everything reflects that transformative power of true knowledge.
What sets them apart?
What sets them apart? He talks about their focus on the hereafter. They're not just preoccupied with, the pursuits of this dunya. Their hearts are oriented towards that eternal life. And, it shapes their priorities, their choices, their actions. It's like they're living with this constant awareness that this life is just a journey.
They're constantly aware of that final destination.
They are.
And that's driving really all of their decisions.
Absolutely. And, al-Ghazali, he talks about their humility. Truly learned men, they're not arrogant, they're not boastful. They recognize that, all knowledge comes from God, and that actually leads to humility.
Yeah, and I love that. The more they learn, the more they realize how much they don't know. And that keeps that ego in check.
It does. And, he talks about their detachment from worldly possessions. They're not consumed by the pursuit of wealth or status. Their focus is on acquiring that beneficial knowledge.
That's going to help them in this life and the next.
Exactly. And they recognize that true wealth is in spiritual growth and closeness to God. It's like they understand that those material things, they're fleeting, but knowledge, good deeds, those are treasures that last forever.
And I love how he talks about their gentleness and kindness
Yes.
towards others, that it's not about being harsh and judgmental.
Yeah, it's like that knowledge has softened their hearts. They're more empathetic. They're more patient.
More forgiving.
They see the good in others, and they try to bring that out. And, while they're knowledgeable, they don't engage in those debates just to show off.
Right.
Because they recognize that that leads to arrogance.
It can really damage your spirituality. It can be very harmful.
It can. And, they've moved beyond that need to prove themselves.
Mm.
Their focus is really on sharing the knowledge, illuminating hearts, and benefiting others. And, they're patient.
Mm-hmm.
They're patient in the face of adversity. They don't let those challenges and setbacks get to them.
Right. They see those as opportunities to grow.
They do. And, they're truthful. They're trustworthy.
Their actions speak louder than words.
They do. And they're not content with just accumulating knowledge. They want to put it into action.
And I think that's what makes them the living embodiment of knowledge. It's not just learning, it's doing, it's acting. And, I love that analogy that he uses, right, where he's comparing the learned men of this world
to the outer shell of a date.
Yeah.
While the truly learned men of the hereafter are like the sweet inner fruit.
And it's such a vivid image, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
true knowledge is not about just outward appearances.
It's that inner sweetness. It's that depth.
That connection
to God. And so, al-Ghazali's The Book of Knowledge, it's been such an enriching journey for us.
It has.
Full of insights, practical guidance for anyone who wants to embark on that path of knowledge and spiritual growth. And, what's so amazing is that his teachings are as relevant today as they were centuries ago.
Absolutely. This deep dive has really left me feeling so inspired.
Me too.
To not just seek knowledge, but to embody it, to let it shape my heart. And, inshallah, our listeners are feeling the same.
Inshallah.
And this is just, a small taste.
It's a glimpse.
A small glimpse into this vast ocean of Islamic wisdom that's out there. So we hope that you'll continue to join us as we explore more of that, inshallah, in our future episodes.
We'd love to have you.
But until then, may your pursuit of knowledge be filled with sincerity, humility, and a deep love for God.